and Harya helps farmers, you know, understand warehousing better. Also allowing them to get credit facilities. Gentlemen, I hope I got the introductions right. Prasanna, how are
Thanks for
you?
that.
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on this,
Okay.
Vishal.
Okay, I want to quickly get into the brass tacks because interestingly, she started off with taking a punt on the previous government, saying we have paid better in terms of MSP on wheat and paddy. It started off that way. But what do you guys think about the budget in terms of agriculture, agri-tech, and fur farmers? I'll start with you, Prasanna, and Rajat, we could go into straight away after that. Prasanna, go on.
See, at an overall level, Vishal, I think it's a good budget, that continues the pace of reforms going, and looks at increasing the capital expenditure, which also enables the growth of the economy without meddling too much into direct taxes and also on the indirect taxes. And also, in a way, it came in as a relief, saying that there's no additional COVID-related cess as was broadly, expected. So that to that extent, it's been very positive. And also, I think from an agri perspective, overall, one really sees this moving in the right direction with the focus on infrastructure being extremely high. So overall, all in all, I would really say that it has been a positive move.
Okay.
Certainly, there are asks which one would really have, which the budget hasn't addressed, but I think overall it's been a positive move.
Okay. Ranjit, over to you quickly, and then we'll get into the nitty gritties. Ranjit, can you hear us?
Likewise,
Okay, go on.
as
Yeah, we can
and
hear
I
you.
think at an overarching level, yeah, can you hear me? Now, saying that as overall, I think it's been a good budget for agriculture, right? In various forms, either by providing higher impetus to better credit through improving the credit target or through improving the infrastructure investments. And quite interestingly, also doing things like levying an agriculture infrastructure, cess on the petrol and diesel. Now, we need to see how it gets offset because the logistics cost go up because of that. But there is some talk about using the custom duty reduction in certain parts to offset the increase on the cess. But the fact that cess is going to help improve, gain more access to liquidity for the infrastructure side, both pre and post harvest is a good thing. So I think overall, I think the government is trying to keep an eye on its radar. Now it just comes to be we just need to see how it gets operationalized. Getting into the specifics, how does it reach the last mile? Who are the various providers in between where we can get access to? We talk about a DFI too, actually a developmental FI, which is not new to India. So what role does that play into enabling the agri credit access needs to be seen, or is it only going to be infra by way of better roads and better infra, right? So overall, I think it's been pretty good. We should forward to.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about the digital piece first. Let's get away with that. She wants to link 1,000 mandis across the country. She talks about ENAM. It's interesting because, with all the protests that have been happening, I thought if the mandis were linked in some way, the legacy middlemen can actually add value by plugging into the digital world. But I wanted your thoughts on, with these agri reforms, why are they digitizing mandis when they've already said that the farmers can sell to anybody outside? Who wants to take this? Prasanna, you want to go for it?
I can certainly go with this, Vishal. I think it's also important to see this question in the perspective of, the agri infrastructure fund being available to APMC mandis, and that added to the digitization of the mandis really makes for a case for for the fact that mandis are here to stay. So some concerns around whether mandis will be relevant, not relevant, and I think mandis have to make themselves relevant, and these are key inputs that are coming in from the government to make them relevant and stay relevant in the with the onset of the new farm laws as and when they are rolled out. That when private players come in and set up private mandis, you have a set of infrastructure which is already there, which
Yes.
people are already used to, and if they're modernized, they're further deepened. I think that's a very strong step towards strengthening the
Yeah.
existing APMC infrastructure. So, to me, ENAM with, I think, Stellap's
Yes.
role would be further enhanced when, by way of providing that layer of quality assurance to commodities. I think, ENAM, one of the reasons why people still don't feel very confident about using those platforms is that there is very little assurance on quality of the produce. And then
Yeah.
linked to the entire payment mechanism can really change the way
Oh, yeah.
mandis have worked in the past. So all of that, I
I
think.
want I want you to quickly talk about warehousing too. She briefly touched about commodities, warehousing, storage,
Yeah.
but you were saying that we need to look at the details on how that's going to pan out, right? That's a very key component, and the GST is the major component there. Ranjit, will come to you immediately. I
Sure.
want you to keep in mind digital, agri tech, and ENAM and the impact that you will make. Plus, we're going to talk about how you can help farmers around because we need to talk about horticulture too because she talked about it. So, Prasanna, over to you.
Yep. So, I think warehousing with the agri infrastructure fund, one sees that, that there is going to be more focus. And I think the rural infrastructure and the agri infrastructure fund that comes up would provide the kind of, financial support which may
Yeah.
be required to further bolster the entire agri warehousing space. That said, my personal feeling is that one had really expected that the GST anomalies on agriculture warehousing should have been addressed because of this core focus around addressing the distress sales by farmers by providing agriculture infrastructure closer to the farm gate. So today, as a warehousing company, when I provide my services on storage of agriculture produce, I do not get GST on
Yes.
my fee. But when I incur expenses to manage that warehouse, I have to pay GST, which means that this 18% that I pay, I do not get that in return from my customer. So this in turn reduces my margin, which becomes a huge bottleneck when I go out to these smaller markets. Also, at the same time, what happens is that as a company, I cannot bear those and absorb those costs. So in a way, it is in a way passed down to the customer as extra charges. So I think that's a huge burden which should have been addressed. While
Why
at
do
the
you think
same
it's so
time,
high on the warehousing when our warehousing itself has been really, the lacunae has been that, storage in India has really struggled in many ways. They want to modernize warehouses, but, to encourage private partnership, what should be the ideal GST?
I think it should be matched at both ends. So if you don't want us to charge GST, then we should also not be made to pay GST. I think it's about saying that it has to be matched at both the ends. If I have to pay GST, then I have to also get GST. So our thought is that it's a good thought that there should not be any GST on storage of agriculture
Yes.
produce. At the same time, there should not be any GST on expenses that we as companies or any warehouse provider incurs. So, which is where I think the anomaly is. We've already brought this up to the
Okay.
GST Council, and hopefully,
Okay.
in the months to come, this should be resolved.
And this rural infrastructure fund quickly, would it play a major role in integrating the supply chain?
Absolutely. I think, one key thing that we've seen that, one is in the agriculture infrastructure, which are the warehouses, near farm gate, packaging, grading, sorting kind of infrastructure, but also in terms of roads, in terms of electricity, in terms of other infrastructure elements in the rural areas are going to be critical if you really want other buyers to come down. So it all needs to be seen in perspective that at one end, when you talk about reforms in agriculture marketing, you would want entities to come down to the farm gate to procure commodities. You need
Correct.
transportation to happen closer to where the production is, and for which the roads and other infrastructure, rural infrastructure, is extremely important. So I think all in all, if you see, there is some amount of coherence that one sees. I don't know whether it is really thought about it that way or it just falls in places
Well
as a
said.
puzzle, saying that at one end you're talking about agri infrastructure being created through the AIF, then you're talking about FPOs coming in and working there, you're talking about rural infrastructure coming in. So all of this put together and the agri infrastructure cess to be able to support this,
Yeah.
all of this comes together as a coherent story. And it will be really interesting to see how it is implemented, the anomalies between the federal structure and the central.
I I just wish they listen to this and create an open API platform where every one of you can plug in and change things, right?
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
I want to talk about this Operation Green scheme and bring it in context with Ranjith, right? Ranjith, quality is the name of the game. You've been trying to help farmers understand the quality of milk. You've been helping a lot of these local dairies get better scale, create value-added products, right? From a digital perspective, do you want to add thoughts on what is it good to take mandis online at this point of time, make middlemen more relevant, and in the context of your company, how will this change? This Operation Green scheme that they talk about.
Yeah, so digitization, I think, is going to be a strong implementation component, right? So without digitization, how do you know that things are being done transparently? How do you ensure that the farmers are getting access to the right price through either the feature phone or the smartphone or one of them, right? So I think digitization helps in ensuring that you have the right implementation tenets in place, right? Starting from the grading part, right? When you get something in the basic grading and pricing, right? To converting that grading and pricing into currency. At the end of the day, what do farmers care? They come in with a pack of potatoes or tomatoes and need to walk out with cash, right? How do you convert this agri produce to cash? Or how do you convert this agri produce to currency in a very transparent way, so they know that if they produce better, right, if the quality is better, they get paid in more, right? You mentioned Operation Greens. I think it was only for 3 commodities earlier.
Yeah, it's 22
right?
now.
Tomatoes, onions, and potatoes. I think that's been extended to more 18 more, or now probably 22 commodities, right, which is really good. But I'm hoping that there's an equivalent extension to dairy, because milk is obviously not part of Operation Greens. I think the whole premise is that the milk was part of Operation Flood when it started, Dr. Kurian. And I think by virtue of it, we have about 25% of milk in the organized sector. But fruits and vegetables is still sub 5%, right? So maybe that's the reason it's probably need to go into the details and see if there are equivalent funds that dairy needs for its cold chain, right? Dairy has an equivalent of warehousing, right? You store milk in a bulk milk cooler. So that I probably need to dig deeper and see what parts of this also percolates down to dairy. Because all said and done, dairy is the biggest crop out there. Prasanna mentioned about GST. We do have certain ask. As you know, Vishal, that the value-added products, right, is in India probably only about 30% of milk is converted to value-added products like butter, ghee, cheese, and all that. Whereas if you look at Europe, it's almost 90%. So India is still, sort of a drink milk society and not an eat milk society. And to make that conversion, I think if you can actually reduce or remove the GST on things like cheese, not cheese, at least things like butter, ghee, right, which sort of, so that we don't have to pass on that load to the consumer and instead pass on the benefits of bottom line back to the farmer, would have been a good thing. I didn't see any mention of that in the budget on how government intends to improve the value-added product consumption by more GST-led interventions. But those would be some of things that we would look forward to when it gets down to the implementation.
Okay, and your digitization of APMCs is very important, because they say that a large part of this rural infrastructure fund of 40,000 crores, will go into digitization of APMCs. And I think they should, in the details, say that, okay, we'll call in participation from startups like yourselves, right? I think that's the only way, and not reinvent the wheel, right?
Absolutely. So I think I'm hoping when it gets down to implementation, we obviously would love to be party to it pre-budget. But having done this across 35,000 villages, digitized about 35,000 villages, right? Some lessons learned, some fingers burnt, right? So the idea is, how do you sort of optimize it? And we have seen it right under our nose that any digitization initiative that you do, right, be it UP, be it Bihar, be it down south in Telangana, Karnataka, Kolar, wherever, right, automatically the quality goes up, right? Automatically the farmer churn reduces, right? Absolutely. And automatically the entire all the stakeholders, be it the processing plant, be it the cold chain providers, be it the distributors, all of them benefit from being transparent right through, from the consumer through to the farm. So we need to see how this entire digitization approach is going to, for mandis, is going to pan out, and if we can play a role there to accelerate that initiative as well.
Okay, and Prasanna, what do you? I mean, warehousing. When you talk about it, does it include even dairy and what is it about warehousing that is not scaled in India? And do you think this will give impetus to that scale?
I think when we talk about warehousing, this is again primarily in India the way warehousing is understood is one is the dry storage, which is to
Yeah.
store grains and non-perishables, and the other is the cold storages. So I think these are two areas that we really look at so far as warehousing is concerned. So at an overall level, while in this particular budget there has been no specific mention around promoting warehouses or cold storages or making that distinction, but certainly the thing around the AIF, which has been already launched, and the deepening of that is going to have a major
The
impact.
reason I brought this in is because, like Ranjit said, more than 22 around 22 horticultural crops have been added to this Operations Green scheme.
Right.
And if the word perishable goes very well with warehousing, because without good warehousing, you're really going to struggle.
Right.
Right? Do we have that scale at this point of time? Are warehouses connected? Number one, right? Which Arya is trying to solve, right? And
Right.
what is the big deal? What is the scale we're talking about in terms of? I'm sure that everybody knows that 35% of our agricultural output goes in some form of wastage, either nutritional or value, right?
Right.
So I would like to know that whether this kind of impetus with Rural Infrastructure Fund, Operation Green Scheme, these are announcements, but what does it take to scale to 22 perishable items? What are the difficulties?
Yeah, so I think as long as farm gate level storage infrastructure does not come up,
Okay.
hopefully that's been the objective of the agriculture infrastructure scheme, to say that the agriculture infrastructure fund, that
Yeah.
we need to promote farm gate level storage. So I think Operation Green, by extending it, one really believes that it'll give enough impetus to be able to create that infrastructure closer to the farm gate. And I think it's much more critical for the fresh crops, the horticulture crops. So far as the grains are concerned, at an overall level, India still has a 30% kind of a deficit in terms of warehousing space.
This
In
is
my
for
view,
food grains. This
that
is
is
for food
food
grains.
grains, yes.
Okay.
And this is much larger so far as the infrastructure for cold rooms is concerned. So which is where I think a larger focus would go there, and it is meant to be that way. But at the same time, even for grains, when one talks about it's important to see that how do you democratize storage so that it is available at the farm gate. And in a way, I think while people, the budget has spoken about the agriculture infrastructure fund for creation and of physical infrastructure for warehousing by more capital expenditure, one also needs to look at, more technologically advanced, flexible storage structures.
Okay.
And which is where I think you don't need that kind of capex. At the same time, it is more on demand. It's like it's like a portable warehouse, and which is probably the need of the day today. Can we look beyond these traditional technologies and
Yeah, okay.
traditional structures and look at innovative structures which actually make warehousing more modular? And I think that shift is still to come in the country
Okay.
today, because it's too much of a risk. Suppose I am an investor wanting to create agriculture infrastructure in a village which I don't even know whether would occupy that kind of space or not. Now I end up constructing a warehouse where I'm not sure about occupancy. Now instead, if I have a structure which is, say, portable, I could set it up today, and then once the season is over, move it to another location without any additional cost, or without very little cost. I think those technologies are available. As a company, we've already deployed that. Today, we have to import those technologies. Now, as a company, we're thinking of getting them manufactured in the country. But the idea is to look beyond these capital intensive, high investment structures for storage.
So make it more modular. So
Absolutely.
that's a business opportunity. If you're listening to if you young entrepreneurs out there, this is a startup opportunity. They've just given you out an idea. But coming down to you, Ranjit, value-added products, very important. And horticulture also means value-added products. That's where Prasanna's company comes in with the warehousing and helping these people not to have wastage, right? I'm sure even in milk, there is wastage in our country. And I'm sure for value-added products to succeed, you need some form of modular infrastructure like Prasanna says.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was listening to Prasanna, I was just wondering, because milk is perhaps the most perishable, component out there, right? To give you a sense, there are about 120 to 150,000 cold chain points for milk
Right,
in the country,
right.
right? And it's just a fraction of what we actually need. And to sort of chill milk and store milk, we probably burn about 2 billion kilowatt hours of energy on an annualized basis, right? And out of which only about 25% is driven by the grid and 75% is run by diesel, right? So which
Okay.
basically means roughly, if you work out the math, you're basically burning about 500 million liters of diesel every single year to chill milk, to store milk,
Wow.
right? I'm sure
Wow.
that if you extend it for other, vegetables and fruits, it's going to be in a way higher. So I'm just wondering if you sort of increase the cess on petrol and diesel, how that part is going to work out. Because on one side, you're trying to increase the cold chain and warehousing infrastructure.
Yeah.
On the other side, you're still having, unless you're lucky to be in Gujarat or someplace where you still have reasonable amount of three-phase
Well
power
said.
coming in.
Well said.
Whereas significant part of the village, we do work, for example, in Eastern UP, in the Prime Minister's own constituency in Varanasi area, Chandoli, Chania, which is actually Niti Ayog's aspirational district. And we find that to get a three-phase power, it's not that easy. It's probably easier to get a chartered flight at the peak of COVID. I mean, during lockdown, and that's probably has been easier. So in that context, we just need to see how to sort of iron out some of these contradictions. On one hand, you're increasing the cess, but 75% of the milk cold chain is driven by diesel, right?
Wow.
Number one. Number two, how do you optimize it? Solar, right? We've been considering how do I, do chilling through solar, but some of these solar subsidies and SOPs have been taken off over a period of time, right? When you upload the excess power into the grid, some of those, gross net of subsidies have been taken off. So there are some nitty gritties when you get into it seems to be contradicting. Right? That's something that we need to sit with the Niti Ayogs of the world, the implementers of the world, and say, hey, look, there's probably, if you think of it end to end, there are certain contradictions that come in, and how do we sort of fix it? But those, I'm hoping we will, as we operationalize it, we'll get to know how to fix it.
No, that's a story for me. I'm going to come back to both of you and talk about it. A cess, a diesel cess and everything would really hurt the cold chain in milk and other value-added items, I'm sure. That's fascinating, gentlemen, both of you. There's so much to cover, so little time. I've got two more points to cover, and I think you'll appreciate that credit is very important to farmers. The government's target to do 16.5 lakh crores in financial year 2022. Does the farm economy, I mean, in the old days, we were all used to subsidies, but this credit, right? Is it going to improve the techniques of farming? Is it going to, it clearly says that she said, we will focus on ensuring increased credit flows to animal husbandry, dairy, and fisheries. Dairy is an important point there. And I'm sure that this credit will go to other farmers too. But how efficient is the system as of 2021 when you look at Indian farming, Prasanna? How efficient are we? And what is the future? Somebody just messaged me that 2021 to 2030, it'll be India's decade in agriculture, where agriculture's contribution to the GDP will increase. I wanted both your thoughts on this. Go on, Prasanna.
So, while on the pre-harvest side, one still thinks that, one sees that there is, some amount of an efficiency which banks have been able to achieve through the KCC and the other products that they've made available to farmers. But what we see is post-harvest is one very key aspect, which actually results in higher realization for the farmer. And that aspect of credit has been really falling behind. And which is where, from a budget perspective, we had really expected that while banks have, in a way, I would not say failed, but they've not been really able to get credit available on the post-harvest side to the farmers and the other players, including FPOs and others. And that is one area where NBFCs, agri-focused NBFCs, have been working on. In fact, our NBFC, which provides post-harvest finance to farmers and FPOs, each and every loan that we do would classify under priority sector, which banks otherwise, fall short of. And when we borrow, we do not get that benefit. There is a very small window which has been made available for those loans for on lending, which could be classified under priority sector. So I, as an NBFC, borrow as a normal commercial loan, while when I give the loan, I give it which is exactly what the government wants, and which is where one had expected that probably the avenues for us to raise funds at cheaper rates could be made available through the budget. So I think which is where this entire thing around banks working with NBFCs, the ag fintech companies, to bridge in that technology component so that the loan dispersals could be more efficient, is something which still needs to be worked on.
Okay.
So I think credit, while there is a focus, my belief is that one has to go down one level deeper to understand where the gap truly is. It's not about availability of funds. Banks are flush with funds as of now.
I agree.
But the challenge is that those funds, while banks have, NBFCs like ours and many others struggle to borrow funds at reasonable rates so that
cheaper access,
benefit could be provided and extended back to the farmer. I think that's where the bridging really needs to be done, Vishal.
That's a fascinating point. Going through this decade, cheaper access to credit, integration of the technology from supply, from seed to farm gate to fork, like they call it, will happen. Ranjith, in your case, it's already happening in terms of milk, because you track the produce from obviously the farmer with a few cows all the way to the dairy and all the way to reaching Bangalore or any big city out there. So in terms of credit, right, what do you think about credit itself in terms of growth, in terms of the farm economy going forward? Do you think the government should focus it on the way Prasanna put it out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will take on from where Prasanna left. As you rightly said, it's not like the PSUs, the MFIs, and the NBFCs do not have money and do not see the benefit of lending to the supply chain. But still, when it comes to the cost of these funds, how do we keep it competitive? Of course, it's still cheaper than the local money lender, right? It's definitely cheaper than a local money lender charging 2% for every $100, $10, $10 a month. But how do you operationalize this, right? 0.5 lakh crore extra is a huge boost. And there are different parts of the way you would sort of slice and dice this, right? Number one, in dairy, for example, which had a special mention by the Honorable Finance Minister, an animal is a mobile, trackable, performing asset, right? It's a good thing to lend against it, right? But are there frameworks to do a data-led risk underwriting, right? How do you enable farmer to buy another animal, right? Do you think a State Bank of India would start?
There's no credit history there. Yes.
Right. There's no credit history. Right. 40 to 50% of these farmers are new to credit. Right. How do you enable credit to such people? Right. You do a CIBIL check, you not get a CIBIL score. So do they become necessarily bad? And one of the basic assumption of a typical lending has been an SHG-led lending. Right. An SHG-led lending has its own overheads. Right. Can you do a very typical retail lending? Right. Yeah. Can you do a retail lending? Right? Or do you use one broad brush and say all farmers are risky, or is there a way to say, look, though this farmer doesn't have the necessary CIBIL score, other parameters that you could look at, right?
I wish they do it for the farmers. If they can do it for mobile phones, they should do it for the farmers.
Absolutely, sure. Absolutely, right? People actually do it based on how you and I interact on Facebook and LinkedIn, and you'll be surprised to know how that plays into some of the CIBIL scores. If that's possible, why is it not possible that based on the farmers' mechanisms, methods, protocol adherence, quality of produce, there can be certain metrics that get applied, and RBI endorses it, saying that RBI has done a lot of good job. They come up with sandboxes and all of it, but probably more needs to be done, because I think it's not lack of access is one, but once you provide access to the last mile, how do you operationalize it so that the right folks get access to it? It could be a cattle finance, it could be a finance like a small ticket one, it could be a working capital finance, right? And these are all different products. It's not like just every farmer is going to buy cattle alone, right? There's going to be access where he needs to buy nutrition, he needs to buy input services, he needs to have a working capital gap, because not all procurers pay. It's not like cash and carry, so there's a gap. There's a working capital gap. So how do you sort of operationalize it? And do the banks be given some sort of a framework framework so that they can do one, data-led risk underwriting for new to credit farmers. Number two, there can be product specificities that sort of kick in. I'm sure at a macro level, the FM or an RBI can't dictate all that, but there's a broad framework provided. Then I think these things get operationalized much faster.
Okay. My last question to you, gentlemen. Very important question. Farming is dependent on people, and there was a big talk around creating a platform for migrant workers. I hope they also include farm workers, because farming today is becoming unviable simply because there is not enough labor to work the fields. A lot of the people are selling them off because they see that if they grow something, there is nobody to come and harvest them, and their mechanization also becomes important. I wish they talked about automating farms, right? I think Stellabs would have appreciated that. Prasanna from Arya, you would have also appreciated it. Where do we stand with this budget and announcement on all these things? Like you said, there are multiple announcements. How integrated is the approach? Where do you see labor in this entire migrant labor, farm labor, in this whole scenario? Where is it heading? How can you make farm labor efficient? Now they're talking about making APMCs efficient. Is there a way to look at farm labor training, some kind of permanence there? Well, your thoughts on this, gentlemen, and we'll call it a close. Prasanna?
I think while they've spoken about creating a platform for gig workers and for other
Yes.
workers, I just hope that the farm labor and the farm workers could be put in place. I think one of the things which in a way covers most of the farm labor today are the farmers themselves. Apart from the larger states where probably there is tenant farmers or agricultural labor that comes and works on the field, in most of the other parts of the country, the labor basically comes in from the farming household. So which is
Correct.
where I think steps like MSP or greater realization really makes agriculture more attractive to that household. So I think this is a very good time. Post COVID, people have seen the resilience of the industry, and it's high time that we make sure that the realization from agriculture to the farming households go up. So I think as I said, if you ask me from a individual perspective, I see all of these small pieces of the puzzle being available. But what's important is to say that is there anybody looking at it from a perspective of putting them together to solve that puzzle and say, these are all these small pieces that are available. Infrastructure leading to rural infrastructure, to participation by larger players, strengthening of APMCs, creation of FPOs. All of that put together at the end would realize in greater realization in terms of income for the farming household, and that's where I think the
Phenomenal.
benefit to the labor force in agriculture would really come in. And I think,
Really well said.
and that's where the key thing would be. That's what
Okay.
I would
Okay.
really.
Ranjit, from your experience, the state of migrant and farm labor in our country, and I've seen cows have to be washed by family
Yeah.
members. If not, they employ people
Yeah.
to wash them. I've seen that firsthand. So go on, Ranjit. Are you there?
Yeah. So
Go on, Ranjit.
I think government can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
Prasad?
We can hear you. Go on.
Yeah. So as I was saying, doubling farmers' income. Yeah. So doubling farmers' income, has always been a strong government, mandate, right? How do you shift a farmer from its subsistence level to sort of a micro entrepreneurial level, right? Why does it just have to be doubling the income? If you look at the baseline where it is, even doubling doesn't take him, too far, right? It has to be an order of magnitude higher, so that there is a, respectable, micro entrepreneurial income. And we sort of need to start looking at farmers as an MSME and not as a farmer, right? So how do you shift him from a sort of a subsistence level farmer to a MSME, right? And to do this, he needs to do it in a very respectable manner, right? And people even in the villages don't like to lift, for example, wet dung, right?
Yes.
They don't like to lift wet dung because it's seen as a really too menial an effort, to do that. So what kind of a basic respectable mechanisms can we put in place so that they see it to be significantly better than driving taxis in Mumbai or Bangalore, right? Right. So they're not going to be coming
said.
back, right? So if they know that this is going to be more respectable and it's going to give them an order of magnitude higher returns, then they wouldn't want to come back. Right, they would sort of say that this is a more meaningful, you get better life back there. So I think the ability to look beyond just doubling. I mean, it's a good starting baseline. You need to start somewhere, right? I can't say I'll increase 10x and be at 1.2x. So I think it's a good start, but I think we need to have vision on how do you increase it 10x, right? How do you ensure that he becomes an MSME and he moves away from this farming mindset? And and then it becomes not just doubling the income, but increases the income of the entire ecosystem, right? And for that, I think all that we have spoken about so far, credit, digitization, tech, market linkages, all of them have to sort of fall in place,
come together.
And for us, we've been lucky that most of the migrant workers who come back, we've seen people back in Kolar and other regions where we work, they actually started buying cows and animals and saying,
correct,
this is pretty good, and you guys are giving me transparent pricing. I might as well not go back and drive my taxis or auto rickshaws, and I might as well, buy a few animals and set up a, good farm and run it, because you guys seem to be giving me all the tech, all the options, and all the market linkages. So I think that's the way to go, but maybe we can get more ambitious as we progress.
But gentlemen, you've been wonderful. I like the way you talk about an integrated approach to farming, an integrated approach to way you take services from the seed to all the way up to the fork, they call it. It includes supply chain, cold storage. It includes labor. It includes automation of the farm. Look at the farmer as an entrepreneur, not as somebody who sucks the money out of the country's treasury, right? This is a beautiful budget because we did not talk about subsidies. We talked about progress. We talked about digitization of the mandis and, the distribution centers. Only thing is, guys, please let us integrate farming. Look at farmers as entrepreneurs. Prasanna, Ranjith, you were fantastic. Thank you for your time and thanks for coming to your story.
Yeah, thank you, Vishal. Thank you for having us.
Have a great night, both of you.
Thank
And
you so much.
ladies and gentlemen, this is Prasanna from Arya and that's Ranjith from Stellarts. Okay, bye guys. Bye.
Bye. Have a good night. Bye.